the newsagents.
We're run by stupid people. Stupid people. And we found that out at the debate with Joe. How did that work out? And we're going to find it out again on Tuesday night. Is anybody going to be watching?
Donald Trump is now neck and neck with Kamala Harris. After a summer that was all about Harris, it was her brat summer. She had the momentum, she had the energy, she had the airwaves. But has that run out?
Kamala Harris has put the Democrats back in the game. She had an opportunity after the convention to go further. The latest polling does not make pretty reading for her campaign. She hasn't managed to take it to the next level. Trump is inching forward again on the eve of their potentially only presidential debate. Where does the American presidential race now stand? Welcome to the Newsagents.
It's Emily.
It's Lewis.
And I think we should pull back the curtain, but only an inch, because it is so cold in here. It is like the metaphors are writing themselves, that the summer has ended, that the fun and games and the sunshine has gone. And we are now sitting, I will admit, I'm sitting here with a dog blanket on my knee. Yeah. Very fetching.
Emily has got a blanket on her, so I'm waiting for the medicine trolley to come around at any moment. No, that's for John, to be fair. That won't be back till later in the week.
We want teas, coffees, buns, all that sort of thing.
Apparently there is a thermostat problem in our studio today, so unfortunately.
But that is it, isn't it? It suddenly feels autumnal. And there are 60 days to go until the US election. And there is only one day to go before the big debate. And we know now that TV debates can rewrite the rules of presidential history in the US. And so we thought we'd dig into what is actually happening, rippling away beneath the headlines, if you like, of these campaigns. And why, with all the momentum that we've seen from Kamala Harris over the summer, is she not forging ahead more strongly?
Yeah, so I kind of suppose the longer story about this, obviously, in terms of the polling over the last year, we know that after the cataclysmic Biden-Trump debates, the Democrats fell away. Trump had a very, very clear lead. Biden falls away. Harris replaces Biden. And they have that extraordinary week in Chicago, which we reported on there, and they managed to basically get to a point where they're neck and neck again. That Harris replaces Biden as a kind of almost generic Democrat. There is energy for her candidacy. She manages to reassemble quite a bit of, though as we'll discuss, not all of, the Democratic coalition of 2020. And they're back in the race. And there is this huge, huge hope and expectation that Harris, because of this extraordinary, probably month of fantastic media coverage. I mean, you could not have imagined or hoped for a better run of coverage than Harris has enjoyed. And that wound Trump up and it put him off his game and he didn't quite know how to deal with her. That they get back to a point where Harris is, in a modest way, but in a reliable way, ahead in both the national polling and in the states. And yet over the last couple of weeks, if you look at both the state polling and the national polling, including a really interesting poll from the New York Times today, what do you find? It actually starting to reverse. That Harris, for whatever reason, we can discuss it, but for whatever reason, has not managed to capitalise on that bounce and convention bounce and take it to the next level and win over new voters. She simply reassembled much, but not all of, the 2020 coalition.
I think it's very easy to concentrate on what Trump is saying on the rallies, and a lot of it makes no sense. You know, we've played those clips where he's calling her stupid, or he's questioning whether she's really black, or he's talking about sharks being electrocuted, or windmills, or mentioning Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter, as if he was a real person. So there are all these kind of crazy things that Trump says. And I think that the difficulty is that maybe people who are watching all this stuff and listening to all this stuff get carried away and say, have you heard this? Have you heard this? I think most Americans have tuned it out now. And so there is a whole new level or next level where actually the voters are not listening to crazy stuff on the stump because they've heard it all before. It never really made sense the first time. But they're looking at the policies. And there was, before we get on to the New York Times poll, there was one that I was looking at yesterday, which was an NBC poll, which just talks about the policies. And in terms of policies, if you take abortion, Kamala Harris is way, way ahead of Trump. She beats him by 11 points, I think. But on all the other key factors, particularly the economy and immigration and the war, Israel-Hamas war, Trump beats Harris. So if he sticks to talking about policy, then there is a way in which American voters tune out the rest. Because actually, they don't really care if he sounds a bit weird, as long as they're not paying more for gas, as long as they're not seeing more of their wages go on tax. And he's, in between the crazy bits, also saying that. And it's almost like there's been this collective memory for a certain tranche of Americans who have sort of wiped out everything that happened, I think, under Trump after December 2019. They've forgotten about COVID. They've forgotten about disastrous handling. They've definitely forgotten about January the 6th and the sort of, the rewriting of their votes and democracy. And they've just kind of gone, oh, we remember when inflation was lower and it felt a bit better. And that's kind of the people that she has to reach and kind of remind now, because they're focusing on the policies.
Trump currently holds a 13-point advantage on the issue that voters say is the most important issue for the election, which is the economy.
Right.
As you say, she holds a 15-point advantage on abortion, but Trump has done a lot to try and kind of muddy the water on what he thinks about abortion, right? Like repeatedly sort of leaning one way, leaning the other, suggesting he wouldn't be in favour of a
look, I
national
think
ban.
she could win on abortion and he could win on economy.
Yeah.
And altogether, there's probably more people who are going to vote firstly on economy,
Indeed.
not on abortion,
Yeah.
right? We don't know that, but that would be your guess.
Indeed. And so at the moment, in terms of the sort of state of the race, the national polling generally puts Harris ahead by a couple of percentage points. This New York Times poll, actually rather unusually, puts Trump by a percentage point ahead nationally, which is very worrying for the Harris campaign, albeit it's only at one poll. And the polls show that Harris and Trump are within 2 points of each other in the 7 key states that will win the election, right? Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, and Nevada. To win, either Trump or Harris will need to win at least 3 of those 7. Harris is marginally ahead in most of them, but literally by within the margin of error. And what is now extraordinary, I mean, we're used to saying, right, aren't we, that American presidential races are close, and they've been getting closer. I was really struck by what Nate Cohen, the sort of data analyst, election analyst, very respected for the New York Times, was saying today, when he said there has never been, in the history of modern polling, there has never been an election when the final polls, at this point in the race, were as close as they are today. Not 2000, not 2004, 2012, 16 or 20. In each, both the national polling and the state polling, this is the closest presidential election in history, which is really saying something.
I guess you can argue that we're on a slightly different sort of trajectory in the sense that, yes, this is only 60 days out from the election, but in terms of people getting to know Kamala Harris,
Indeed.
that has obviously come much later. I think, a third of Americans polled say they still don't really feel that they know her. And we're going into this debate, not we, obviously.
Are we doing it?
We're not.
Oh, no.
We're watching from our beds, hopefully. But we are going to see Trump v. Harris on the debate stage in Pennsylvania tomorrow night. And I think it's a reminder that he's got a track record on these. This will be his 7th presidential TV debate. She's done, one
And more
memorably.
from the primaries as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, he didn't
Yeah.
exactly. He didn't do
Loads.
the primaries this time round, but he would have done the primaries in 2016. I mean, and TV is his thing, right? He knows the production of TV. He knows where to look. He knows how to moderate his voice, all the rest of it. She's an advocate. She's a lawyer. She's great in a courtroom, but she doesn't look particularly comfortable with those off-the-cuff moments. And we're just going to play you one. This is when she was in a spice shop, sort of, a little stop on the campaign trail. And she answers a few questions. Are you looking forward? Are you going to beat him? Are you all the rest of it? And then somebody says, what's the one thing you're going to bring to this debate? And you can kind of see the panic on her face and hear it a tiny bit in her voice.
Trump in the debate, what's the one thing you want to really get across to him?
Well, there's a lot, but look, it's time to turn the page on the divisiveness. It's time to bring our country together, chart a new way forward.
I mean, don't say there's a lot. Right? If somebody asks you what you're going to do on day one, don't say lots of things. If somebody says, what's the thing you're bringing to the debate, don't say there's a lot. It suggests that you are desperately sort of paddling, trying to find the thing that you want to say next because it's not on the tip of your tongue. And if it were Trump, it would be on the tip of his tongue. It would be an invented lie. It would have drama and it would have punch, but he would come up with something straight away. And I just think, I hear those clips and I think, it's all very well being thoughtful, but it's great being thoughtful, but you've also got to have the sort of momentum, the sense of what you're trying to project right now, right? Because it's tomorrow.
But I think this is potentially why we are coming out of the sort of Harris honeymoon. And look, that was always going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, it was inevitable. You know, she, as I say, she had this extraordinary run, and it was inevitable that the tougher questions would come, and that momentum would run out. But I think it's fair to say that there has been something of a vacuum in terms of her self-definition, right? And to some extent, that has been deliberate because she has wanted it to be a referendum on Trump rather than herself, and she has wanted to maintain that sense of being a kind of, generic Democrat without sort of extenuating or emphasizing some of her own flaws. And so she hasn't done many media interviews. She's done one media interview, she's done one sit down. I think we can say that the convention, partly because it was probably saying goodbye to Biden as much as introducing her, failed to define her, right? And she hasn't had much time. Again, in fairness, this is the shortest presidential campaign in a sense in history because she basically only had 60 to 70 days as the candidate. Nonetheless, the danger, right? The danger in failing to define yourself is, who's the guy who's going to define you? It's going to be Trump. Yeah. And there is evidence from this polling that some of the attacks that he has been making about her are starting to sit with the electorate. So obviously, as he sharpened his attack, he started to suggest that she's too left-wing, this whole Comrade Kamala stuff. Again, the latest polling would suggest that more American voters are concerned about her being too extreme, too left-wing, than about Trump being too extremely conservative, which again to us might sound bizarre, but it shows the extent to which Trump's messaging about her is starting to land in the vacuum of her saying little about herself.
I think at the heart of this is the quandary about whether or not she can be the change candidate. Correct, I mean, we were talking about, all the Labour lot going off to the DNC and saying, oh, we can help you win, we can help you win. We just decided to say change the whole time. You can do that if you're the Labour Party and you've been out of office for 14 years, if Keir Starmer has never actually held office. You can't do that if you've actually been the vice president. And so I think that's the real quandary, is that on the face of it, she's a woman, she's the first Asian American woman to stand, she's the first black American woman to stand for president. She has everything that suggests, sort of superficially, if you like, or in wider terms, she is change. But Trump can also tie her to the administration, right? She's tied to Biden. And so one of the places where I think he was actually pretty effective was reminding people about the Afghanistan pullout, right? Now, I don't think anyone particularly pins that on the vice president. I don't think that works. And as it turned out, Trump botched the whole sort of campaign of this because he ended up recording a video in Arlington Cemetery and people felt that they were just being used, the sort of the home of the heart of the war dead of America in Arlington, Virginia, ended up being part of his sort of, campaign strategy, which looked really naff. But I guess the idea of saying she was the one when that happened. She was at Biden's side when your inflation went up. She was there when your bills went up. She was there when the border got breached, or whatever he wants to say, is powerful. And I guess the hardest stuff for her, right? Because she's already said, I don't want to play up the woman thing. I don't want to play up the race thing. I'm not going to talk about that. So what are you left with? Your record, right? Now, she can argue that the record's been very good, but she can't argue that the record's been great and she's changed. That doesn't work.
I think that is spot on. In a sense, this is, I think, the cardinal element of this campaign, which has still, and we're talking about a lack of definition, and this is the area where the definition is shakiest of all, which is that from the beginning it's been obvious that she had to try and find, and it's hard to do, to try and find a way of both taking the best of the Biden legacy, whilst also recognising you're turning a page. And as you say, she's not doing that through talking about the obvious way in which it would be in terms of her race and gender for understandable reasons, because I don't think that's politically saleable. And this would be the finding in the New York Times polling that I would be most worried about if I were the Harris campaign, which says that in this poll, more than 60% of likely voters said they thought the next president should represent a major change from Biden. They want it to be a change election, right, rather than a continuity election. But only 25% said Harris represented that change, while 53% said that Trump did. And this has always been.
So who is your incumbent?
So who's your incumbent?
Is it the guy who's run 3 times in a row?
Exactly.
Is it the brand new woman who was also the VP?
Yeah, I mean, this is why this is such a weird election, right? In a sense that it has not been clear where incumbency would lie. Is it with the sitting vice president, which would normally be incumbency, or is it with the guy who was president literally 4 years ago, right? Yeah. This never happens. We haven't had this for like 120, 130 years. So it hasn't been clear. And from this poll, at least, it is clear that Harris is losing that war to represent the change. And in a country which is addicted to kind of self-renewal, that's how it sees itself, that is problematic. I mean, there probably is a reason. I mean, this is an amazing stat, really, when you sort of think about it. But only 4 sitting vice presidents have been elected president in their own right while they've been sitting. Right, 3 of those were in the 19th century, the early 19th century, ages and ages ago.
And Gore probably should have won, but didn't.
Yeah, he nearly
in
did.
2000.
And one was George H.W. Bush in 1988. Right,
Yeah.
It is very hard, history would suggest, for a sitting vice president, probably again because America is so interested in this idea of self-renewal and change, to actually win from incumbency.
Because you're sitting. Exactly.
Yeah. And Harris has got that weight of history against her, and that changed that. If American voters who are particularly concerned about the economy and think they need a change, and indeed, arguably, what Trump is doing is actually winning on both scores, which is to say, I am both the change, but also, do you remember, by the way, the economy was better under me. We can have an argument about whether that was true. And so he's sort of winning on both counts on that crucial measure. That's what I would worry about.
I mean, an indication that I think she's slightly nervous of that is, I mean, she's nicked a couple of his really good policies, right? So one of his policies was no taxation on tips.
Although it's a terrible actual policy. I mean, we're not going to get into that, but it could be a very good political one. But
politically, I mean, think how many people depend on the service industry. Think about how many people work in hospitality in a swing state like Nevada, Vegas, and you're suddenly speaking directly to all the caterers, all the waitresses, all the waiters, all the barmen, all the, everyone, and saying you can take your tips home tax-free. That was something that Trump came up with, I think, 4 months ago, and she adopted it in the summer. And so you suddenly get the sense that she's not just standing on the Biden platform. She's standing on kind of her own renewal. Oh, I've had this idea in the last couple of weeks. What about this?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about where Harris is standing, because this is the other thing about this election, right? Which is and the thing that we miss because of Trump's kind of craziness, is that Trump really was a watershed in lots of ways, just in terms of where the terrain of American politics is standing and sat, right? Which is that the truth is, as we've discussed before, on terms of economic policy, in lots of ways, Biden is far more continuity Trump than he is continuity Obama, in a sense of America is a more protectionist country. Both Harris and Trump are way more interventionist, way more statist than they would have been, than the Democratic Party was like 10 or 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the unions were kind of love this, right?
So in a way as well, like the Democratic Party's own thinking has been evolving very, very rapidly. And you've got an election, which is, as we say, very, very short, where Harris has not had much time to actually formulate her own ideas or her own policy agenda, or indeed the politics around it. And so she's having to do this on kind of double speed, dog years, sort of really rapidly, and that is very difficult, and some of those strains are showing, whereas Trump has been very clear and consistent, well, not consistent but his agenda has been consistent for a long time.
Okay, and what you would say, certainly in those economic terms as you've just laid out, is that there is currently no traditional Republican policy in here at all, which makes the endorsements that Kamala Harris got over the weekend sort of even more curious in a way, because this is the time when you're going to start to see big figures, whoever emerges, whoever does a sort of a media round or an interview, will be asked where they stand, who they're going to vote for. So Kamala Harris has ended up with 2 Cheneys for the price of one. Dick Cheney, who was the actual vice president under George Bush, and his daughter Liz Cheney, who, as we know, was hounded out of office, out of Congress, essentially, by Donald Trump when she said she wanted to stand up for the rights of the American people against democracy. And this is her take on what Trump stands for.
Every opportunity that Donald Trump gets to show the American people who he is, he pretty clearly, and look, his running mate is doing this too. I mean, this is my diplomatic way of saying it. They're misogynistic pigs. And
look, it is quite a moment. Republican vice president, someone like Dick Cheney, so he was involved in Republican administrations as far back as the 70s. Saying
He was
that
a
he would vote.
neocon.
He was a neocon. Yeah, but in a way, I mean, Trump isn't, right? Their politics really are completely divergent. I mean, it wouldn't be that convergent with the Dems, but as you say, Emily, there is no
There's no Republican platform
Republican.
left.
No, that doesn't exist. And I think that there is one thing from all this polling, and again, I can imagine people listening to this going like, what? Like, how can he still be at 45, 46, 47, 48%, still so robust? I mean, you have to say, the resilience in the Trump votes is extraordinary. And what you're basically seeing is the Democrats' own coalition be shaky, in the sense that, like, Trump is currently winning 2/3 of white voters without a college degree. Right, that's 40% of the electorate. Cleaning up at that level means the Dems have to max out their own coalition. And right now, although Harris is doing better than Biden was 6 months ago, she's still doing worse than he was in 2020 with black voters, with Latino voters, with young voters. The most hopeful thing for her, particularly in before this debate, is that the polling does suggest that more voters are still undecided about her. They want to know more about her. They're still curious about her. 28% said they felt they needed to know more about her. Well, only 9% say that about Trump, because everyone knows Trump, right? He's such a known quantity.
Exactly.
So it is possible that in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, particularly after the debate, we could be sat here talking about the fact that voters have seen what they've seen, they like it, and she's got momentum again. But that is the big question mark as to whether that happens.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, there is every chance that we are recording this episode a week out from a massive poll bounce. We just don't know. And this is your daily caveat with polls. They only show you a snapshot of what might happen if the election was today or tomorrow. And the other thing is that the national polls are irrelevant. It really doesn't matter how many points Donald Trump clocks up in Texas or Kamala Harris clocks up in California. It all comes down to these tiny margins, sometimes of around 10,000 votes in the swing states. And currently in the Great Lakes states, the places where Biden was doing very well, then Kamala Harris is also doing well. She's beating him in Michigan, I think in Wisconsin. Pennsylvania's on a knife edge. And in the Sunbelt states, Trump seems to have the edge. All that means is that there is everything to play for in each of those states, because you're talking about several 100,000 votes, nothing more.
Right after this, we're going to be talking about politics a bit closer to home. A big week for Labour and for the new government, where Keir Starmer is facing what could be biggish rebellion from his backbenchers. Stay with us. So Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is meeting with Labour MPs on Monday night on what I think is going to be a pretty testy exchange, meeting with the Parliamentary Labour Party about this controversy, which feels like it's getting bigger and bigger, at least within Westminster and within the Labour Party itself, over her plans to means test the winter fuel payment. Winter fuel payment is about £200 to £300, which has been sent since 1997. Actually, one of the first things Gordon Brown did when he became Chancellor with that Labour government at that time, to provide some payment to pensioners to help pay for their fuel bills in winter. Of course, Rachel Reeves came to office and said that there is a £22 billion black hole in the public finances, which she has got to try and fill this year. So made the highly unusual step of announcing an in-year change, saying to pensioners that not only will you not get this next year, or at least most of you won't get it next year, you won't get it this year. And so previously about 11.5 million people were expected to receive the winter fuel payment for the next year. That is going to go down to only about 1.5 million or so, and it will save the Treasury about £1 billion. And this is creating a lot of unease within the Parliamentary Labour Party. Lots of MPs saying they're getting inundated with emails about it, lots of people furious, and there is a vote on it on Tuesday where there could be a rebellion from Labour MPs.
Yeah, I think there are two questions about this. One is Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves, setting up this fight to prove what he's been saying all along, that he's not trying to be popular, that he's going to make hard choices, that the way to show that you're serious about change is actually changing things as opposed to sticking to the status quo? All that would suggest that he's kind of ready to have this fight with his backbenchers. And we know that even with this rebellion, there may be 50 abstentions, but we're not expecting many to vote against the actual bill. And even if they did, well, to be honest, he's got such a strong majority. Mathematically, it probably wouldn't really dent that. So the question is Keir Starmer sort of looking for this fight? He can get the unions energised, he can get his backbenchers energised, he can sort of, piss off the John McDonalds, if you like, of the world and others. I'm not saying that it's just the Corbyn wing that feeling this. A lot of people feel this very strongly. But I guess that the central question is why she felt this was worth doing so early on in the summer. We know we're going to have the budget. They could have brought it out at the same time with mitigating circumstances. They could have, given with one, taken with another, and still managed to make that saving of, I think, 1.4 billion or whatever. So I guess the question is, presentationally, why you would do that, why you would announce this so early just to get people sort of gasping. Was it a mistake? Was it an unforced error? Or was it something that he was kind of looking to drill home?
I don't think they're looking for a fight about this in the sense that I think that they would know. I think they've been taken aback by the strength of feeling from Labour MPs. And lots of Labour MPs have been taken aback by the reaction to that. I mean, we've got to remember, right, we're dealing with most of the Parliamentary Labour Party, actually, most of them, majority of them, are new MPs. Right, which is unusual because so many
probably
were elected.
Terrified in that sense.
And most of them have never. I mean, they. I think it's fair to say, very few Labour MPs, if any, go into politics to take away benefits or to take away kind of extensions of the welfare state. Right, they don't do that. That's not what Labour MPs are interested in. So they didn't want, in an ideal world, to be voting on taking away something for pensioners, even if rich pensioners benefit as well. They're new MPs. They haven't had to take tough votes before. They're all giddy in the summer of coming to Westminster, many of whom didn't expect to win their seats. And now there is the actual tough grind of government and difficult votes to make, and they're not used to it. And I've spoken to a few Labour MPs who have said, they've had, in some cases, like 1,000 more emails on the subject in the last few weeks.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. So,
you mean from constituents?
Yeah, some of them.
I thought meant from the Labour whips.
No, from constituents. I mean, some of them are kind of like round robin, and some of them are sort of organised. But I don't think there's any doubt that there is a real
strength of feeling.
There's a real strength of feeling about it, and worry about it. Look, there are lots of pensioners because I mean, what the proposal is that pensioners who are the poorest pensioners who are on pension credit will continue to receive it. That's obviously a minority, but obviously the problem. This is one of the arguments about means testing. Whenever you means test, whenever you bring in a threshold, you're always going to have people just above the threshold, right? So you get people on just over £12,000 a year or so, what their pension is.
Which feels devastatingly unfair because they end up being the poorest of everyone.
And genuinely worrying. We know how high fuel bills are and so on. So that is completely understandable. I mean, what the Treasury would say, and Rachel Reeves' view, is that, look, that this £22 billion is a real thing. And I have spoken to Treasury officials. Obviously, there's been a lot of back and forth about it. There's no doubt that there are real spending pressures for this year, in a sense that I was talking to one Treasury official a while ago who was saying, the Conservatives did get to a point where there was a devil-may-care attitude with this stuff. It isn't made up. I mean, the Labour are obviously gilding the lily. They're maximising the kind of political benefit of it. They're really talking it up. But those in-spending pressures were there.
They've got mentionitis. I mean, Keir Starmer cannot go a day without mentioning the 22 billion black hole, just to make sure that everyone has heard that loud and clearly.
Indeed. And so they say there are real requirements to have to bring forward some of these things, and they would say that one of the reasons they have to do it now, partly because they have to address spending pressures this year, is because they have to let pensioners know that it's going to happen, because obviously you wait until the budget, then it's November, people, you can argue, are already sort of expecting that they'll get this, rather than being told in the summer that they won't get it. But there's no doubt that there is,
which does seem to suggest, I mean, that really speaks volumes in the sense that if you're warning people that they might be cold in a couple of months, that suggests that there is a real problem at the heart of this policy.
This is one of those things that Treasury officials have wanted to do for years. They basically brought it forward to every chancellor, including Tory chancellors who's thought about it, by the way, and because, the Treasury hates universality. This is the kind of, i.e., giving benefits to everyone.
To everyone, to free school meals for all children, even if you can afford it.
Treasury, it's just Treasury mindset. They hate it, right? Because they see it. You can have a big argument
profligate,
about,
isn't it?
Well, I mean, they see it as just a waste of money. They would much rather target it, right, at the poorest, which is what this policy would do. The counter argument to that has always been, as it always is with universality, the great benefit of making a benefit universal is everybody gets it, right? The poorest get it. The worry about saying that only people who get pension credit will get it is that we know that there are lots of poorer people who do not sign up for pension credit because they don't know that they're eligible for it. They tend to be lower information kind of voters. They might not have heard of it, and so on. So the downside of universality is you end up giving Richard Branson it, theoretically, if they claim it. But the plus is that your little old lady who's living in County
Is
Durham,
that nobody goes cold.
nobody, or at least they have that help. And then the flip side to it is if you means test it further, i.e. if you say
Taper it,
we
so
taper,
you have
we
different-
taper it,
yeah.
exactly. So what some Labour MPs want to do is to say, okay, well, let's build in a load of modifications to it, whereas you taper it, if you earn a bit more, then you get a bit less, and so on. The problem is, as soon as you start introducing lots of complexity, that itself becomes more expensive to administer.
Of course.
And so
your 1.4 billion suddenly goes down to half that because you spent it all on bureaucracy.
Exactly. So it is a real bureaucratic problem. This is basically what the Treasury is kind of weighing up, alongside the sort of policy mechanisms of it versus the politics of it, which is clearly, to some extent, proving problematic.
I guess it really tests appetite. You know, it's all very well to say, we want more housing. What do we need? We need more housing. And then, obviously, you know, you mention the place where people are going to build housing and you kind of go, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't want the housing there. You know, you say, we want change. And then he goes, right, this is what change looks like. And everyone kind of backs off. I think it's testing his appetite as well as the voters. The other thing I think it kind of shows you, and we were talking about this earlier today, is, I mean, pensioners, like puppies, are sort of ring-fenced in the public imagination, is that they should sort of get everything they need always, right? And it sounds an obvious thing to say because, of course, you want to look after the elderly, of course you want to look after the vulnerable, but it's somehow crossed the threshold into the undoable. You cannot take away anything, even from rich elderly people, because somehow that's seen as deeply unrespectful, as deeply divisive, as uncaring, as all the things that, you know, Theresa May might have said made for a nasty party, right?
I think that's spot on. I think the politics of this is really interesting, partly because it's a relatively modest measure in terms of how much it saves. But one of the reasons I think that Conservative chancellors haven't done it up to now, even though the Treasury wanted to do it, it's partly because the Tories are more reliant on older people as part of their voter base, so it's partly that. But it has also partly been always this sense of benefit versus political, sort of policy benefit versus political gain. And they knew, as everyone knew, as soon as you go after pensioners about pretty much anything that they have received up to now, despite the fact, you know...
Do you remember that big row about the TV licences that George Osborne had with Tony Hall at the time?
Yeah, free TV licences for over 75.
From the BBC.
Yeah, the power of the grey vote is very significant, not just in terms of that they represent...
Not just electorally, but emotionally, I think.
But emotionally, within the press as well, the Daily Mail going for this in a really, really big way, in a way that we do not see, frankly, any kind of countervailing equivalent for younger voters.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's tuition fees or whether it's COVID catch-up or anything like that, there is just
it's like,
no
you'll be
equivalent.
fine. You'll manage. You'll be fine. Your life's ahead of you.
Yeah, even though sometimes, as you say, we are dealing with... I mean, I was struck... I was watching my LBC show the other day and someone phoned up and said, you know, that we owe pensioners so much. And of course, some pensioners, that is absolutely true. But when people say things like that, there is a sort of almost a kind of hint about the kind of pre-war generation and about the war and so on, and the idea of... But of course, we know that, you know, many of the current people of pensionable age, that is not them. There are very few of those people left. I mean, you know,
the baby
people...
boomers,
yes,
post-war.
Exactly. People who... Indeed, I'm very post-war. I mean, people now becoming eligible for a pension are people born in the late 1950s. I mean, they're too young for the Beatles. You know, like, this is, you know, we're not talking about people that far away from our own sort of moment of cultural memory. So I think, and you can have an argument about whether it's right or wrong and so on. And clearly, as I say, to reiterate, there are lots of pensioners who really do struggle, and who struggle particularly with winter fuel. And obviously, they don't have a means, which is part of the argument necessarily, of expanding their income as someone of working age might be able to do. But it is an interesting test case about taking away something that pensioners have been given. And the other reason it's interesting as well politically is because, although we've said they're not going to lose this vote, as long as they keep the will to do it, which I think they will, they can't possibly retreat from it. It's such an early battle. But it is a little harbinger. It will be interesting to see how many Labour MPs either vote against or abstain. I'm told actually it will be quite a bit bigger than the expectation is than what happened with the two-child benefit policy rebellion. But it will be an interesting taste of how much appetite there is from Labour MPs to actually introduce tough fiscal measures that we know there likely will be more of, or certainly will be more of, because the Chancellor and the Prime Minister have told us that there will, in the October budget. So it is a little harbinger, potentially, of problems to come.
Now, we know that you are still pining, longing, missing,
Craving,
craving
yearning.
John Soapbox, the Thesaurus, the news agency. He is not yet back. He's going to be in the studio, we hear, Wednesday.
We hear. Well, it's on the grapevine.
Yes.
They're talking about it outside Leicester Square
They are.
among the buskers. He's
They're
back.
singing it on their soapboxes. He's coming back, we think, on Wednesday.
I think, yeah.
Not soon enough for us.
No, but we have had...
But...
Yeah. But we have had a message from Ian about John's absence. And his obviously we know he's got a book out. You know he's got a book out.
Ian has.
I know. I've heard, again, it's on the grapevine. Ian says, Emily Lewis, love the show, never missed an episode. Thank you, Ian. Can you please though find an alternative phrase for John's book plugs, as it sounds too close to John's butt plugs. I thoroughly enjoy you both ripping the piss out of John. Us too. But I would much prefer not to have to explain my sudden outbursts of laughter to my wife. With my thanks, Ian. Sent from my iPhone. I like that. He's just on the phone. He just had to message in about
Just
that.
had to say, can you stop saying that? And of course, what you've done, Ian, is you've taken all these wonderful, naive minds and inserted that particular phrase.
Don't talk about inserted. No, that's not what we want.
You've just done that, haven't you?
Yeah.
You've just ruined it. You've ruined that now for everyone else who was blithely going along, just thinking it was about publicity for a book.
Although, if John thought it was a way of driving sales, I'm pretty sure he'd be happy to include a free packet of butt plugs, if necessary.
Strangeland.
Yeah, Strangeland. Yeah, Strangeland. Yeah, strange plugs.
We'll leave you with that thought. On that note,
and
see
we
you
will be
tomorrow.
back tomorrow.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.